Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Doug Downs. I am the manager for external relations, and we've got a great half-hour program for you today. I think you're going to like it. Joining us is the Chief Operating Officer of the Canadian Electricity Association, Francis Bradley. Every year, the CEA does its State of the Industry report. He's going to give us kind of a, I guess, abbreviated form, because it's a long and thoughtful report on that. Abbreviated, that's good. And then Francis and our own James Mckee are going to talk about, maybe I can say, the future state of what electricity looks like, where the puck is going. So just before we get started, a quick safety moment. Every morning when I leave my little suburb in Chaparral, there's two routes that I can take. One, inevitably, a little shorter than the other, probably by about 3 minutes. So that's my natural habit, is to take that shorter route. But I noticed that in the fall, there's about a 2-week stretch that the sun is absolutely blinding for me just as I'm passing the K-6 public school. I've tried cleaning the windshields perfectly, sunglasses, a visor. I can't seem to fix that issue. So I decided a couple years ago, when I saw the sun getting to that point in the fall, I had to change my habit, and I had to take the longer route. And now I do that daily. So sometimes, in order to mitigate things and go where the puck is going, we have to change our habits for safety and for other matters. So, without further ado, the state of the Canadian electricity industry. Please join me in giving a warm ENMAX welcome to the COO of the CEA, Francis Bradley.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about the state of the Canadian electricity industry here at ENMAX. I always love coming to ENMAX. It's a wonderful facility, and I've had an opportunity to work with folks at ENMAX since the very beginning. So, state of the industry, state of the Canadian electricity industry. The reason why we decided to call it that, we initially were just talking about an outlook. What's the outlook for the industry? But we were reflecting on what happens every year in Washington, and there's the State of the Union. And so we kind of wanted to try and do the same sort of thing as the State of the Union, reflect upon where the industry is, and also put forward what we think are some policy recommendations for the future. So that's what we've put together in our State of the Industry. I'm with Canadian Electricity Association, and ENMAX is a member. The 36 largest electricity companies from coast to coast to coast are members of CEA. Municipally owned companies, investor-owned companies, crown corporations are all members of our association. Every year we try and operate under a theme. And so our theme, as we were looking to put this together for 2019, we were considering different themes, different thematic approaches. And it is for the state of the industry, but it guides all of our communications throughout the year. And of course, we considered safety, and we considered, innovation, and a range of other ones. But we landed on resilience, and we landed on resilience because of some of the crazy things that have been taking place with respect to weather, and with respect to all of the other challenges that our companies face. So from floods to ice storms, to cyber attacks, and so on. So we picked resilience to key off of. So, Canadian electricity sector. We employ 81,000 Canadians directly within the companies. We contribute $30 billion to Canada's gross domestic product, the GDP. But what I like to point out to people that don't know anything about this industry, that it isn't simply a number. It's more than that. I like to say we're the first $30 billion of GDP, because when electricity isn't there, the rest of the economy grinds to a halt. So, when we talk about critical infrastructure, I always like to point out that electricity is the most critical, and therefore, the first of the GDP. We generate 650 terawatt hours, and we have, of course, a significant trading relationship between Canada and the United States. So when we put together our state of the industry, we wanted to look at a number of themes. So we put 6 themes forward. So the first one is around competitiveness, investment, and regulatory environment. So on all of these themes, we also put forward what we think are some policy recommendations, and I'll touch on all of those. But this quote is one that I think it really kind of captures the challenge that we have with respect to competitiveness. So this is from John Stackhouse at the Royal Bank. Canadians have figured out winter, transcontinental travel, and space robotics. Competitiveness, not so much. Now, why would Mr. Stackhouse make a statement like this? Well, maybe it's because we're ranked 14th on the World Economic Forum Competitiveness Index, behind the United States and several European countries. We are falling behind on regulatory burden at 38th, and I'll talk about that. We're 47th on the macroeconomic environment and 49th on the effective taxation and on the incentive to invest. At the federal level alone, there are 90 different regulations that are in force and or are pending for the electricity sector. People often think of electricity as something that is a provincial issue. It's a provincial responsibility. Take a look at this slide. These are all of the different regulations that impact the electricity sector in Canada. And so we've been talking a lot in Ottawa, and anybody that'll listen to us, about the cumulative impact that all of these regulations have on the sector. So we need to address this, and there are certain things that we believe need to be done. The obvious one is, of course, addressing some of those cumulative impacts. But there are some issues that we can also address that should help us as well. We need to look at tax policy changes. We need to look for those that are up north, the territorial debt caps, so that they can, because there's a significant issue in the north with respect to their infrastructure and the challenges that they're facing. We need to look specifically with respect to that cumulative impact of regulations. We need to look for opportunities so that we can reduce that duplication between different levels of government. The second area we touch on is in the area of infrastructure renewal and innovation, right? And I think, James, you and I are going to have a little, I'm sure, discussion about what the future is going to look like and some of the issues that we're going to see as we move down the track. But we're looking at massive investment that's going to be required in this sector. There was estimated a couple of years ago by the Conference Board of Canada that we were going to need to invest $350 billion in this sector in a 20-year period. That was like for like. We're not in a like for like world. We know the future is going to be different than it is today. We're going to have significantly more electrification. We're also going to have to address issues around climate change adaptation. And so a more recent prediction now done by the Conference Board of Canada is putting the price tag at about $1.7 trillion is the investment that's going to be required in the electricity sector out to 2050. Big number and a pretty significant challenge. There is a magazine called Renew. It's an infrastructure magazine, and they every year they come out with their top 100, and it's the top 100 infrastructure projects in Canada. This year, 6 of the top 10 were electricity, specifically on the electricity sector. So the Bruce Power refurbishment, the Darlington nuclear refurbishment, the Muskrat Falls project, the Site C project in British Columbia, and the Kiask hydroelectric project in Manitoba, and the Ramen complex in Quebec. And so those are 6 of the top 10 infrastructure projects writ large are specifically in the electricity sector, and together those are investments of $64 billion. So that's stuff that's happening right now in the investment. What are the challenges? I mean, probably not a surprise to most people. The challenges in terms of putting those investments in and building that infrastructure. There's always challenges with respect to public opposition to infrastructure projects, but we also have issues around government policy and the lack of certainty and predictability. And I've spent significant time in the last year talking about Bill C-69, appearing before parliamentary committees, talking to stakeholders, lobbying senators. As one of my colleagues said this morning, there's only 15 people I care about right now. It's those 15 senators who are on the committee reviewing Bill C-69. Questions with respect to access to public and private capital. We've been working with the Canada Infrastructure Bank to make sure they're plugged in to the issues and the concerns that we have in this sector, so that potentially electricity projects will be able to access the funds in the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Okay, the third area we touched on is in the space of environmental sustainability and compliance. So some really key messages here, and these are among the messages that we deliver whenever we can to external stakeholders. The electricity sector in Canada, taken as a whole, relative to just about every other jurisdiction, is actually really, really clean. 80% of our electricity is greenhouse gas free. Yes, we have challenges, certainly, as some jurisdictions are addressing the other 20%. But taken as a whole, Canada has a really, really great GHG profile. And we've been addressing this as a sector for quite some time. Since the year 2000, you see some of the really significant reductions that have taken place in terms of all kinds of emissions, not just GHG emissions. But this is at a time as well when we're facing other challenges on the environmental front. Chief among them are the challenges as a result of weather. We had tornadoes in eastern Canada last summer. 350,000 customers were without power. We're seeing this more frequently. The challenges of weather, right? Severe weather. We're forcing the industry to strengthen its infrastructure. And so, this is certainly top of mind for people in the sector when they think about building infrastructure. It's also how are we going to build it so that it is more resilient. Fourth area, and one that there's a lot of focus on these days, is with respect to electrification of the Canadian economy. So there's some predictions here that more than half of global car sales by 2030 will be electric, extending to all passenger cars by 2050. If you look at where our emissions come from today in this country, the next biggest block is with respect to transportation. And the easiest and lowest hanging fruit is going to be electrification of transportation. Now, when we talk about electrification, we want to talk about more than just transportation, but that's the starting point, right? And that's the entryway into this. 52% by 2050 is what, this is research done by the Electric Power Research Institute. So if we electrify the Canadian economy, if we move to decarbonize the electricity system, what is going to happen then to demand for electricity? And so this is a study that was done by EPRI in the US that essentially says we're going to need 50% more electricity. There have been studies done in Canada as well. Trottier Energy Futures Institute is one that I like to point to, where they tried to get a sense of if we actually try to deliver on those climate change commitments that we've made as a country of an 80% reduction by 2050. What does that do to the economy, and what does that do to the electricity system? Well, it means we're going to be needing twice as much electricity in 2050 than we have today because of the electrification of transportation, HVAC, industrial processes, and so on. It's the only way that we're actually going to be able to address climate change is by massively electrifying the economy. And so, yeah, but this is one of my favorite quotes. The best way to protect your future is to create it. And by the way, that is a real hashtag if you look on Twitter. And so, but when thinking about the future, one of the things that I've been doing, and I started this at the beginning of the year, is I'm doing a podcast where we talk about the future with leaders from the industry, and it's been a lot of fun. Your CEO was one of the people that was featured on our podcast, and it was a fascinating discussion about the future and sort of her perspectives on where the future is going to go. And it's been a lot of fun. So here, this is my commercial. Flux capacitor, that's my podcast. Fifth area, briefly, cybersecurity continues to be a significant concern for CEA. We see the threat increasing. It's increasing year over year. It's becoming more complex and more, frankly, more challenging. There's a lot of work that we're doing to address this. We work with a lot of agencies. You see some of them listed here. It continues to be, of course, a very high priority for us. One of the things that we do in this space is there's every 2 years an exercise called GridEx that's organized by NERC. We do an executive tabletop that's keyed off of that. So again, there's a lot of collaboration that takes place in this space, and a lot of it is cross-border Canada-US. And so I spend a significant amount of time as well on US issues because that relationship, it isn't just a question of the trade relationship, it's mutual assistance. You know, that's really, when I'm thinking about our Canada-US relationship, I don't start at the millions of dollars that we make selling electricity into the US. I start at those crews that go back and forth across the border when there's emergencies and there's a requirement for assistance. Our grid is integrated. There is no stopping it from one side to the other. So that means, quite apart from the trading relationship, we always have to be cognizant of the security and the resilience implications of those connections between the two. The United States is very different from Canada in terms of how it generates its electricity. We're 80% GHG emissions free. They have a desire to try and get to 50%, and that's going to be a stretch for them as well. So let me jump to some of the things that we think we should be doing overall in Canada to address some of these issues, to kind of get us to a place where we're making progress in these areas. So first off, I said we key this off of the State of the Union in the United States. The state of the industry, we think, is strong, but, and it's always a but here, but there are some things that we need to do to make sure that we continue to be strong. So we want greater regulatory certainty and predictability. And this is, I mentioned Bill C-69, but there's a lot of other issues that need to be addressed with respect to certainty. We need, again, efficient project approval processes and proper timelines. We need to improve our investment conditions. I mentioned those debt caps earlier. We need government investment in some of those transformative electricity infrastructure projects. We need a clear Canadian strategy on electrifying the economy, and I spoke about this 2 days ago at a parliamentary committee in Ottawa, and I think a real serious need that we need to collectively get together and address electrification. We need to continue to invest in cybersecurity, and we need to look at how we're going to enhance that Canada-US relationship. So, taken as a whole, this is sort of a short summary of what we see as the state of the electricity industry in Canada in 2019. It's something that we're going to be updating as we go forward, and it's something you'll find on our website. Electricity.ca. So if you have an opportunity, visit the website, join the conversation. You can find us on Twitter, and make sure you download that podcast. So with that, maybe, James, we can get into a bit of a discussion.
Am I on now? Hello? Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you.
That was, well, yeah.
Put that down.
I have to say, there's a lot packed into that report, and there's a test after, so don't leave right away. Anyways, what I thought was really interesting in your presentation were two of the words that jumped out to me on your early slides. And the first one was resilience, and then it was competitiveness. And I was really excited, encouraged to see the word competitiveness. So The reason why is when I think about ENMAX and I think about what we do, I mean, we're a 100-year-old company, we're an urban utility at the core. The whole reason that we're here, we exist, is to underpin the Calgary economy, number one, and improve the quality of life for Calgarians and ultimately Albertans now. And when I think about Alberta right now and I think about Calgary, I think about resilience and I think about competitiveness and I think about how we're challenged. And what we've been thinking a lot about at ENMAX over the last 2 years, not just thinking about, we've been doing a lot about, is around how do we support Calgary and Alberta in a different way. We've been supporting this economy, this geography, as safe, reliable, low cost for 100 years. And that's served Calgary, it's served our citizens well. But in the future, what we see is that Calgary needs to be more competitive. We need to diversify our economy. We need to attract investment, different types of investment that we haven't attracted before. And for a city, for an area, for a geography to do that, it really needs to think about what are the needs of investment and citizens in the future. And we see that that's really going to change. And you touched on many things, and some of them, what we see, you talked about climate change and decarbonization, how that's really driving policy. And so we look at, to be competitive in the future, we're going to have to help our cities, basically decarbonize the transportation sector. We're going to need to help the city get to a place where it can attract investment and look for startups and tech companies and those types of things. So what we've been doing is we've been, in addition to making sure that our grid is resilient and ready for some of those changes that are coming, we've been working with our city to plan for things like, okay, what is the data infrastructure required to support an economy in the future? And then combined with that, how do we support things like electric and autonomous for transportation? That takes a lot of data as well. So, so the areas that we're working on actively today are areas like, okay, how do we convert fleet vehicles, those vehicles that drive around Calgary and go home at night to a bus barn or to back to South Service Center or wherever? How do we convert those to electric? We'll start there. Additionally, we see, and the city sees, that it's going to need to have much higher levels of data communications. And you read about and see what the telecommunications companies are doing. They're talking about fiber to the home. They're talking about 5G communications. So we're heavily focused as a company, and that's both our regulated operations and our competitive ones, at how do we position Calgary to be a market leader? How do we position Calgary to be the ones that telecommunication companies want to come to so that they'll invest and create these networks for the future that enable all the types of services that cities need to provide to attract investment? So those are some of the things that we're actively working on today. We have pilots around fleet vehicles. We have active conversations and actually out there helping the telecommunications companies install new fiber networks and things like that. So those are a couple of things that you may not have expected that the electric utility would be working on. What are you seeing in other jurisdictions?
Well, a lot of similarities in other jurisdictions across the country. Everybody's thinking about what that electric future is going to look like. I mean, the one thing that we do know, the one thing that we can be absolutely certain of, regardless of where you think we're going to land in the future, in all of those scenarios, people are going to be using more of the product that you and your colleagues here are delivering. Right? That's the one certainty that we have, is the use of electricity and the demand for electricity is going to increase. Exactly how it's going to increase and where it's going to be is subject to some discussion. But everybody's, I think, across Canada is focused on electrification, certainly, and what that's going to look like in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and the next 20 years. Because we're going to have to start making bets today about what that future is going to look like. Right? And there was an electric vehicle conference earlier this week down east, and I was presenting awards at it, but I was having a conversation with somebody, and we were sort of batting around the concept of, okay, well, what are you building for, right? The federal government has now got incentives for electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. Great, is that actually going to be the future? Is the future going to be individuals owning electric vehicles that they're going to be parking at home and charging at home? Or are we sort of entering a future that's sort of a way stop? It was kind of like when we went from analog music to digital music. There was a period in the middle there where people burned everything onto CDs. It was digital, but it wasn't, in the end, the technology that we wound up using. So is it, and you mentioned autonomous vehicles. Is it going to be autonomous vehicles in the future? Or is it actually going to be individuals owning vehicles? And if it is going to be autonomous vehicles, isn't that maybe just an extension of what you guys do today? Is that maybe going to be one of your unregulated businesses in the future? Are you guys, is ENMAX actually going to be running the network of those vehicles here? You're not going to not build them here, certainly, but why wouldn't it be an unregulated business for people who actually understand electricity? Because that's the only input to that autonomous vehicle, right? The only input when they drive around is electricity. Well, like, who knows how to manage that? And who's going to be able to control that? Well, gee, maybe we actually should have people that know this sector actually step into that space. I don't know. That's just an idea. Well, I'll take 2% if you move in that direction.
I can honestly say, I have not pitched our board on that idea, but what we are thinking about is the infrastructure required to whoever owns or however the transportation network plays out and however the business models evolve. There will be an underlying infrastructure. We believe electric and autonomous is the future, whatever that plays out like. So you're going to need electricity to power vehicles. And from an autonomous perspective, you're going to need data communications. And everything I've learned or read about on data communications is it has to be very high speed, low latency communications that allow vehicles to communicate with each other in real time. And that's a very different set of infrastructure than cities are equipped with today. Certainly Calgary is not equipped to handle that. But as a utility, one of the things that we're really good at is we're good at both building and operating and maintaining linear infrastructure. And therefore, we certainly see as one of the first plays is to build out that infrastructure network to enable Calgary. Then we can think about what are the different business models. Transportation can be different. Already in different jurisdictions, you see where your Uber app is integrated with public transportation. And you basically can be at home and you can pick, the app will go out, the AI figures out where you want to go, how many of you are going, how much luggage and everything you got to carry with you, and gives you options for how to get somewhere. And you can take the milk run, which includes everything from public transportation to maybe riding on a scooter, or you can take the limo service directly where you want to go. And it gives you a choice and options. And the transportation network actually moves and evolves around the demand of the citizens and of the people in real time. So it's pretty cool. So a lot of changes coming. Don't know where we'll fit into that yet, but maybe next year we'll look at that one. But it's interesting to see how different companies are thinking differently about how they can create a future that helps support their city, their economy, and makes us ultimately more competitive and more resilient to changes in business and changes in basically global economic changes that can hit us.
And that resiliency of our sector, of the electricity sector, is also one of the things that increasingly is being used to market Canada generally as a destination. Because we're talking about data and information. Canada is increasingly a place where people are coming to actually build that IT infrastructure because we're resilient. We've got a very stable system. Relative to other jurisdictions, our electricity prices are low. And the big thing, and it's something that I wouldn't have thought of a couple of years ago, the cooler economy in Canada actually is a significant boost because of the heat that's produced by servers and server farms. Oh. So we're seeing an increasing interest. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about these Bitcoin miners that want to come and install themselves. But if you get beyond that, I mean, the future is, yes, it's going to be more electric, but it's also going to be more digitally driven, and so that means we're going to be requiring more and more server farms. And Canada's a place, and Calgary's a spot. These are the sorts of things that we should be promoting us for in the future, because I mean that's going to be big business.
Well, I couldn't agree more. One of the stats that you threw up there in your talk and in your state of the nation, if I can call it that, was around Canada being over 80% of its electricity generated from non-emitting sources, carbon-emitting sources. Yeah. Not many people know that.
Right.
And that's something that we need to get out and market much better. When I think about, okay, who's green in the world? I think about the Europeans.
Yeah.
They're always so green. And, I remember looking at Germany's stats, and they were trying to get to, less than 50% coal. And some of their coal is lignite, which is like the dirtiest, nastiest coal ever. Yeah. And it's like, and then I look at us.
And we're
and we're the green economy out there. But the one thing that's exciting when I look at your presentation, when I look at our future and what we're looking at from an ENMAX perspective, is the need for our product is only going one way, and that's up. Yep. And our challenge is going to be delivering that in a way that is beneficial to the consumer, and one that gives the consumer what they need when they need it, and has a great experience doing it. So those are the things that we're working on. It sounds like a lot of the things that you spoke of we're certainly tying into, and I also saw some things in there that I hadn't considered before. Okay. So really appreciated your talk.
Terrific. I enjoy coming down.
Just want to say thank you for coming out and joining us.
James, thank you.
And sharing, and thanks to all of you for coming out over lunch and listening to us. And we did want to give you a little gift. Okay, the little gift is, it's not much, but it's an important gift.
Okay.
It's a donation gift card.
Okay.
Which you can donate to your favorite charity.
Great.
And just a big thank you for coming out and sharing with us today.
Terrific. Thank you very much, James. Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.